I still remember the exact moment I realized I had built something that would let strangers fall in love with each other while my own marriage was quietly dying in the room next door. It was 3 in the morning, the kitchen light was buzzing like it always did, and I was staring at my computer screen watching two people I'd never met exchange messages about their favorite books, and I thought, this is it, this is actually working. And then I heard my husband's footsteps on the stairs and I minimized the window like I was hiding an affair, except I wasn't cheating with a person, I was cheating with an idea, with a future I could see so clearly it burned. And when he asked me what I was doing, I said nothing, just work, and the way he looked at me, like he already knew he'd lost me to something he couldn't compete with, that look still haunts me 29 years later because he was right, I had already chosen, I just didn't have the courage to admit it yet. Let me take you back to a moment that doesn't make sense until you understand what it cost. Picture this, 1995, my kitchen table covered in notebooks and printouts, me in sweatpants and my husband's old college shirt, building what would become the first real online dating platform while the man I'd loved since I was 16 sat in our living room watching television alone. And here's what nobody tells you about revolution, it doesn't announce itself with trumpets and glory. It starts with you neglecting the person who believed in you first. It starts with choosing code over conversation, with picking potential strangers over your actual partner, and I did that. I made that choice every single day for months, and I told myself it was worth it, that I was building something important, something that would help people, and I absolutely was, but I was also destroying the one relationship I thought would last forever, and the worst part, the part that makes my stomach turn even now, is that some dark corner of my soul knew exactly what I was doing and did it anyway. So why am I telling you this? Why am I about to spend the next however long walking you through one of the most painful chapters of my life? Because everyone wants to hear about the success, they want the highlight reel, the moment the platform launched, the first million users, the magazine covers, the money, but nobody talks about what you actually sacrificed to build something world-changing. Nobody admits that innovation often requires you to become someone you barely recognize, someone willing to hurt the people who love you most. And I need you to understand this because maybe you're sitting there right now with your own impossible idea, your own kitchen table moment, and you're wondering if you should take the leap, and I'm here to tell you the truth, the whole ugly beautiful truth, which is yes, take the leap, but know that the landing might shatter things you thought were unbreakable, and you need to decide right now, before you start, whether you can live with that, whether the thing you're building is worth the person you'll have to become to build it, because I did it, I built it, and I'm still not sure if I made the right choice, and maybe that's the most honest thing anyone will ever tell you about success. I met Tommy in chemistry class when I was 16 years old. That's where this whole story really begins, not in a kitchen in '95 but in a high school lab in 1979. Both of us hunched over beakers pretending to understand molecular structures while really just trying to figure out how to talk to each other without sounding like complete idiots. He had terrible handwriting and I had terrible social skills, and somehow those two broken pieces fit together perfectly. We started dating 3 weeks later. Married at 22, right out of college, and here's what young love feels like. It feels inevitable. It feels like the universe conspiring to put two people in the same place at the same time and saying, here, this is your person, don't screw it up. And we didn't screw it up, not for a long time. We built a good life, simple and sweet, the kind of marriage people write country songs about, Sunday mornings and shared coffee and inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. Our first apartment was a tiny studio above a bakery, and every morning we'd wake up to the smell of fresh bread, and Tommy would make terrible jokes about how we were living the high life, literally high up above the carbs, and I would groan, but I was smiling, always smiling back then. We didn't have much money, we were both working entry-level jobs, me at the medical supply company doing data entry, him at a small engineering firm doing basically grunt work, but we had each other and that felt like enough, more than enough. It felt like everything we needed to be happy. We had routines, small rituals that made us feel like a team. Friday nights were movie nights. We'd rent videos from the store down the street, make popcorn on the stove because we couldn't afford a microwave, and we'd curl up on our second-hand couch and watch whatever looked interesting. Saturday mornings were for sleeping in and then walking to the farmer's market, buying vegetables we'd never heard of and trying to figure out how to cook them. Sunday afternoons were for his mother's house, dinner with his family, and I loved that, loved being part of something bigger than just the two of us, loved the noise and the chaos and the way his mom would always send us home with leftovers in mismatched containers. But then something shifted. I can't even pinpoint when exactly. Sometime in my early 30s, this restlessness started growing inside me like a vine wrapping around my ribs, making it hard to breathe. Tommy had his job at the engineering firm, steady and reliable, and I had mine doing data entry at a medical supply company, monotonous and soul-crushing, and we had our routine, and our friends, and our two-bedroom house with the leaky roof we kept saying we'd fix, and I should have been happy. I had everything I was supposed to want, but I wasn't. I was suffocating. I was dying in slow motion and nobody could see it because I smiled and cooked dinner and pretended everything was fine. The data entry job was killing me in ways I didn't know how to articulate. 8 hours a day staring at a screen, typing numbers and codes into a database, no creativity, no problem solving, just repetitive motion like I was a machine myself, and I would come home with my eyes burning and my wrists aching and Tommy would ask how my day was and I would say fine, it was fine. Because what else could I say? That I felt like my brain was rotting, that I was wasting my life one spreadsheet at a time, that I was smart and capable and being used for nothing more than my ability to type quickly and accurately. I started having these panic attacks at work, nothing dramatic, just moments where I couldn't breathe, where the walls felt like they were closing in, where I would have to excuse myself to the bathroom and stand in the stall gulping air and telling myself to get it together. You have a mortgage, you have bills. You can't just quit, you can't just walk away from steady income because you're bored. Being bored is not a valid reason to upend your life. But it wasn't just boredom, it was this deep existential dread, this feeling that if I stayed in that job for another 5 years, another 10 years, I would completely lose myself, I would forget who I was underneath the routine and the paycheck and the safety. Then I discovered bulletin board systems. Stay with me here, I know that sounds incredibly boring. But this was revolutionary for 1993, the idea that you could connect to other computers through your phone line and talk to strangers about anything, science, movies, philosophy, whatever, and I became obsessed. I would stay up until 2, 3 in the morning reading messages from people I'd never met, people who knew nothing about me except what I chose to share, and it was intoxicating, this anonymity, this freedom to be whoever I wanted without the weight of everyone's expectations crushing me. Tommy didn't understand it at first. He would come downstairs and find me at the computer and he'd say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "Just talking to people." And he'd say, "What people?" And I'd say, "People on the internet." And he'd look confused because the internet wasn't really a thing yet, not the way we think of it now. It was this weird underground network of nerds and academics and people who were just curious about what computers could do. And he didn't get why I would rather talk to strangers online than come to bed with him, and honestly I didn't really understand it myself. I just knew that when I was on those bulletin boards I felt alive in a way I didn't feel anywhere else. One night I was on this board for people interested in technology and someone posted asking if anyone thought computers could help people find romantic partners. Most people laughed it off, said it was impossible, that love required chemistry you could only feel in person, but I sat there staring at that question and something clicked in my brain. This electric moment of clarity where I thought, why not? Why couldn't you use data and algorithms to match people based on compatibility instead of just random chance and geography? And I started typing. I wrote this long response about personality metrics and matching systems, and before I knew it I'd outlined an entire platform in a forum post at 3 in the morning while my husband slept upstairs. That post got responses, lots of them, people telling me it was interesting, asking questions about how it would work, and one person said, "You should build this is actually a good idea," and I laughed it off at first, said I didn't know how to code, didn't know anything about building websites or databases, but the seed was planted, the idea was in my head and it wouldn't leave. It kept growing and expanding and consuming more and more of my thoughts until I couldn't think about anything else. That's when it started. The thing that would consume me, the thing that would eventually cost me everything. I began researching, reading everything I could find about psychology, relationships, computer programming, database management. I taught myself to code, spending my lunch breaks at the library checking out books about C++ and basic web architecture. I filled notebooks with ideas, sketches of how the platform would work, questions users would answer, ways to weight different compatibility factors. And Tommy noticed, of course he noticed, I was disappearing right in front of him, present but absent, there but gone, and he would ask me what I was working on and I would give him these vague answers about a project, something I was exploring, and he would nod and go back to his newspaper and I could see the hurt in his eyes but I couldn't stop. I was infected with possibility, with this vision of something that could change how people found love. I remember one Saturday morning, we were supposed to go to the farmer's market like we always did, and I told him I needed to stay home and work on something, and he said, "Work on what?" And I said, "Just a project," and he said, "What kind of project?" And I realized I hadn't really told him anything about what I was doing. I'd been keeping it secret like it was an affair, and so I tried to explain. I told him about the bulletin board post, about the idea for a dating platform, about how I thought I could actually build it, and he listened and then he said, "That sounds interesting, but isn't that something a tech company would do, not something you would do in our kitchen?" And I felt this flash of anger, this defensiveness, because he didn't believe I could do it, he didn't see what I saw, and I said, "Why not me, why couldn't I build it?" And he said, "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant you don't have any experience with this stuff," and I said, "So I'll learn," and he said, okay. "I'm just worried about you, you seem stressed," and I softened a little because he was right. I was stressed, I was barely sleeping, I was obsessed, but I couldn't stop, I didn't want to stop. Here's what nobody tells you about obsession: it feels exactly like falling in love, that same consuming intensity, that same inability to think about anything else, except this time I wasn't falling in love with a person, I was falling in love with an idea, and ideas don't need you to be present, they don't care if you forget to ask about their day or remember their favorite food. Ideas just demand your attention and your time and your soul, and they take and take and take until there's nothing left for the actual humans in your life. By 1994 I had a working prototype. Nothing fancy, just a basic system running on our home computer where users could create profiles, answer questions about themselves, and get matched with other users based on compatibility scores. I tested it with a few people from the bulletin boards, used fake names and photos, just to see if it would work, and it did. It actually worked. People were matching and talking, and some of them were even meeting in person, and I remember the first time someone told me they'd gone on a date with their match and it went well, I cried. I actually cried sitting at my kitchen table because I'd created something that helped two strangers find each other, and that feeling, that pure uncut euphoria. Nothing in my life had ever come close to matching it. Not my wedding day, not graduating college, not buying our first house, nothing compared to the feeling of knowing that my idea, my code, my creation had facilitated a real human connection, had brought two people together who might never have met otherwise. It was addictive, that feeling, more addictive than anything I'd ever experienced, and I wanted more of it. I wanted to scale it up. I wanted to help hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people find each other, and that ambition, that vision, it became more important than anything else in my life. But Tommy was fading away. I could feel it happening and I couldn't stop it. It was like watching a photograph left in the sun, the colors slowly bleaching out until you can barely remember what it used to look like. We stopped having real conversations, everything became transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up milk? When's your mother coming to visit? We stopped touching each other except in passing, a hand on a shoulder as we moved through the kitchen, brief and meaningless. We stopped laughing together. The space between us grew wider and wider, and I told myself it was temporary, that once I got the platform launched I would focus on us again, I would make time, I would fix it, but deep down I knew I was lying. I knew I was choosing the platform over my marriage, and I was doing it consciously, deliberately, and that made it so much worse because I couldn't even claim ignorance. I couldn't pretend I didn't know what I was doing. Our friends started noticing. We'd go to dinner parties and I would be physically present but mentally absent, and people would try to include me in conversations and I would give these one-word answers because I was thinking about code, about features, about how to make the matching algorithm more accurate. Tommy would make excuses for me, say I was tired from work, say I had a headache, and I would let him cover for me instead of being honest about what was really happening, which was that I didn't care about their stories about their kids or their vacations or their home renovations. I only cared about my platform, about my creation, about the thing that was slowly eating me alive. His mother pulled me aside one time after Sunday dinner, this was maybe 6 months into my obsession, and she said, "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself," and I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to say, I'm building something incredible and it's destroying my marriage and I don't know how to stop, but instead I just smiled and said, I'm fine, just busy with work, and she looked at me with these sad knowing eyes like she could see right through me, like she knew I was lying, and she said, don't lose him, he's a good man, he loves you, don't take that for granted, and I nodded and said I wouldn't, but I already was. I was already taking it for granted. I was already choosing something else over him every single day. In January of '95 I made the decision to quit my job and launch the platform full-time. This was insane, absolutely reckless. We had a mortgage and bills and exactly zero backup income, but I'd reached this point where I knew if I didn't do it now I never would. I would wake up at 65 still doing data entry, still wondering what if, and I couldn't live with that. I couldn't carry that regret. So I told Tommy. We were having dinner, spaghetti I think, something simple, and I just said it, I'm quitting my job to launch this dating platform full-time, and he put down his fork and looked at me like I'd just announced I was joining a cult, and he said, we can't afford that, and I said, I know, but I have to try, and he said, what about us, what about our life, and I said, this is for our life, this could change everything, and that was the first truly honest conversation we'd had in months, and it was about me leaving him. Isn't that twisted? The only time we really talked was when I was explaining why I was choosing something else over him. He asked me if I'd thought this through, if I had a business plan, if I knew how I was going to make money, and I told him yes, I had it all figured out, which was partly true. I had a subscription model in mind. I knew there was a market for this, but the truth was I was also just leaping, just trusting that it would work out, and that terrified him because Tommy was practical, Tommy was a planner. Tommy needed security and stability, and here I was proposing that we throw all of that away so I could chase this wild idea that might not work. We stayed up until 2 in the morning talking about it, really talking for the first time in months, and he kept coming back to the same question, why now, why this, why does it have to be you? And I tried to explain about the feeling I got when my test users matched, about the potential to change how people found love, about how I felt like I was dying inside at my data entry job, and he listened and I could see him trying to understand, trying to support me, but I could also see the fear in his eyes, the worry that this was the beginning of the end for us, and he wasn't wrong, it was, I just didn't want to admit it yet. Finally he said okay. He said, if this is really what you need to do, if you can't be happy without trying this, then do it, I'll support you, we'll figure out the money somehow, just promise me you won't forget about us, promise me you'll still make time for our marriage, and I promised. I looked him in the eye and I promised I would balance it, I would make it work, and I meant it in that moment, I really did, but promises are easy to make at 2 in the morning when you're caught up in emotion, keeping them is the hard part, and I would fail spectacularly at keeping that promise. He didn't try to stop me. That's what killed me. He just nodded slowly and said, okay, if this is what you need to do, and I wanted him to fight for me, to get angry, to demand that I choose him, but he didn't, he just accepted it with this quiet resignation that made me want to scream, and I realized he'd already let me go, maybe months ago, maybe the moment I started disappearing into my notebooks and code, he'd released me and just hadn't told me yet. We were both just going through the motions waiting for someone to say it out loud. I gave my 2 weeks' notice at the medical supply company the next day. My boss was surprised, asked if I had another job lined up, and I said no, I'm starting my own business, and she looked confused because I was just a data entry clerk. What kind of business would I start? And I explained about the dating platform and she wished me luck in this tone that said she thought I was making a huge mistake, and maybe I was throwing away stability for a pipe dream, but I had to try. I had to know if I could actually do it. Those 2 weeks felt like an eternity. I was so eager to start working on the platform full-time, to dedicate all my energy to it, and every day at that data entry job felt like torture, like I was wasting precious time, and I would come home and immediately go to my computer and work until midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and Tommy would go to bed alone and I would tell myself, just a few more weeks, just until I get the site launched, and then I'll have more time, then I'll be more present. But that day never came. There was always one more feature to add, one more bug to fix, one more user email to respond to. I launched the site in March of '95. Called it Matchlink, simple and direct, and I promoted it on every bulletin board and early web forum I could find. The response was slow at first, a few dozen users, then a few hundred, and then something incredible happened. It went viral, at least as viral as anything could in '95. People started writing about it, newspapers picked it up, this human interest story about the housewife who built a dating site from her kitchen, and suddenly I had thousands of users, 10,000, 20,000, and I was spending 18 hours a day managing the platform, answering emails, fixing bugs, adding features, and I was making money, actual money from a small subscription fee, not a lot but enough to cover our bills, enough to prove this wasn't just a hobby, this was real. The first article about Matchlink came out in April, in a local newspaper, and the reporter framed it as this heartwarming story about a regular person using technology to help others find love, and they interviewed some of my early users who gushed about how the platform had changed their lives. And I read that article sitting at my kitchen table and I felt this overwhelming sense of validation, like finally someone saw what I saw, finally someone understood that this was important, this mattered. Tommy read it too, and he said he was proud of me, and I could tell he meant it, but I could also see the sadness behind his eyes, because the article talked about how many hours I worked, how dedicated I was, and he knew what that dedication was costing us. More articles followed. Tech magazines, women's magazines, even a segment on a local news show where they sent a reporter to interview me in our kitchen, and I remember cleaning the kitchen obsessively before they came, trying to make it look presentable, and Tommy was at work during the filming, and when he got home that night and I told him about it he just nodded and said that's great, in this flat tone that told me he was checking out, he was disconnecting, he couldn't compete with this thing I'd built, so he was just going to stop trying. Tommy became a ghost in his own house. I would see him in the morning before he left for work, see him at night when he came home, and we would exchange these polite pleasantries like roommates, like strangers, and the worst part was how normal it felt, how easily we slipped into this new dynamic where we coexisted without actually connecting, and I kept telling myself it was temporary, just until the platform stabilized, just until I hired help, just until things calmed down, but things never calm down. Success doesn't give you your life back, it just demands more and more until you don't have a life anymore, you just have the thing you built in the wake of destruction behind you. We stopped going to his mother's for Sunday dinner. I was always too busy, always had too much work, and at first Tommy would go without me and his mother would ask about me and he would make excuses, but after a while he stopped going too, I think because it was too painful to sit there alone and have everyone ask where his wife was, why she never came anymore. And his mother would call me sometimes and I would promise to come next week, next month, and I never did, and eventually she stopped calling and I told myself I would make it up to her. Later, I would fix our relationship later, but later never came. She died in 2001 and I only found out 3 days after it happened because Tommy and I were barely speaking by then and he didn't think to call me right away, and that guilt, that specific guilt of knowing I broke his mother's heart by disappearing, that still sits heavy in my chest. One night in July, 3 in the morning again, always 3 in the morning, I was responding to user emails and I came across this message from a woman who said she'd just had her first date with her match and it was magical, they'd talked for hours, she felt seen and understood in a way she never had before, she was writing to thank me for creating something that made her believe in love again, and I read that email 3 times, feeling this complex mix of pride and emptiness, because I was helping strangers fall in love while my own marriage died of neglect, and the irony was so sharp it physically hurt, like swallowing glass. I heard Tommy on the stairs. Same pattern as always, he couldn't sleep, he came down to get water, found me at the computer, and this time instead of going back upstairs he sat down at the table across from me and said, "We need to talk," and I knew what was coming, I could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm, and I said, "Okay," and he said, "I can't do this anymore," and I said, "Do what?" and he said, "Watch you love something else more than you love me." The truth hits different at 3 in the morning. Everything is sharper, rawer, there's no daylight to soften it, no distractions to hide behind. He told me he felt like he was living with a stranger, that I looked at the computer screen with more passion than I'd looked at him in years, that he understood I was doing something important but he couldn't keep sacrificing himself for my dream, he needed a partner, not a roommate who occasionally slept in the same bed, and every word he said was true, undeniably completely true, and I had no defense, I couldn't argue, I couldn't make excuses, I just sat there absorbing it like punches to the gut. He said he'd been thinking about leaving for months but kept hoping things would change, kept hoping I would wake up one day and remember that he existed, that we existed, that we'd built a life together before the platform consumed everything. He said he felt invisible, like he could disappear and I wouldn't notice for days, like I'd replaced him with code and users and success metrics. He said the worst part wasn't that I worked so much, it was that I seemed happier with the work than I'd ever been with him, and that realization, that seeing me light up over my computer while barely acknowledging his presence, that was killing him slowly, eroding his sense of self-worth, making him question whether he'd ever been enough for me. I asked him what he wanted to do. He said he thought we should separate, maybe divorce. He didn't know yet, he just knew he couldn't keep living like this, feeling invisible in his own marriage, and I wanted to beg him to stay, to promise I would change, to swear I would make time for us, but the words wouldn't come because I knew I was lying. I knew that even as I promised to do better I would go right back to the computer the next day. I would choose the platform again and again and again because that's who I'd become. Someone who prioritized the thing I was building over the person I'd promised to build a life with. I tried to speak, tried to form some kind of response, and what came out was, I don't know how to do both. I don't know how to build this thing and also be the wife you need. And he said, I know. And that's the problem, you shouldn't have to choose but you are choosing, every day you're choosing, and I'm done being the thing you don't choose. And he was right, absolutely right, I was choosing, consciously and deliberately, I was choosing the platform over him, over us, over the life we'd built together, and I didn't know how to stop, didn't know how to be any other way, the obsession had its hooks in me too deep. We sat in silence for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside a car drove by with bass thumping from the speakers. Finally I said, I'm sorry, and he said, I know, and that was it, that was the end of our marriage, not with screaming or drama or thrown plates, just two people sitting in a kitchen at 3 a.m. acknowledging that they'd grown into different people who no longer fit together, and somehow the quiet ending was worse than any explosion could have been. He said he would start looking for an apartment, that he'd move out as soon as he found something, and I nodded, and then he asked, was it worth it? And I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to answer that question, and so I just sat there silent and he stood up and went back upstairs and I sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up, staring at nothing, feeling everything and nothing all at once. He moved out in August. Took his clothes, his books, his half of everything we'd accumulated over 12 years of marriage, and I helped him pack. We were civil about it, almost friendly, which felt obscene given the circumstances, like we should have been angrier, more broken, but we were just tired, exhausted from months of slow decay, and when he carried the last box to his car he hugged me, just briefly, and said, I really hope it's worth it, and then he drove away and I stood in the driveway watching his taillights disappear and I thought, this is the price of creation, this is what it costs to build something that matters, and I went back inside to my computer because I didn't know what else to do, I didn't know how to be alone with what I'd just lost. The house felt different after he left. Emptier obviously but also wrong somehow, like the walls knew something was missing, like the foundation had shifted. I would walk into rooms and see the spaces where his things used to be, rectangular shadows on the wall where his pictures hung, empty shelves where his books lived, gaps in the closet where his clothes had been, and each absence was like a small wound, a reminder of what I'd destroyed. I threw myself even harder into the platform. What else could I do? Sit in the empty house and dwell on my failures? Feel the weight of what I'd sacrificed? No, better to work, better to focus on the thing that was actually succeeding while my personal life crumbled. And the platform was succeeding, wildly, beyond anything I'd imagined when I started. The platform kept growing. By the end of '95 I had over 50,000 users. I hired my first employee, a programmer named Sarah who was brilliant and dedicated in everything I needed, and then another person to handle customer service, and then someone for marketing, and suddenly I had a real company, an actual business with an office and payroll and all these people depending on me, and it was terrifying and exhilarating and consuming, and every success felt hollow because I had nobody to share it with, no partner to celebrate with, just me and my computer screen and the growing realization that I'd traded intimacy for impact, love for legacy. Sarah became my closest friend during this time, which is sad when I think about it now, My closest friend was my employee, someone I paid to be around me. But she was there through all of it, through the growth and the chaos and the late nights, and she never judged me for what happened with Tommy, never made me feel bad about my choices. She just showed up and did the work, and sometimes we'd order pizza at midnight and talk about life and relationships and whether success was worth the cost, and she would say yes, absolutely yes, what we're building is important, and I would nod and agree and try to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. I started getting letters from couples who'd met on Matchlink and gotten married. This became a regular thing, envelopes with wedding photos, long handwritten notes about how they'd never have found each other without my platform, how they were soulmates who would have missed each other completely if not for the algorithm I'd created, and I would read these letters and feel this strange mix of joy and devastation because I was the architect of other people's happiness while being completely unable to maintain my own. I could engineer love for strangers, but I'd failed at my own marriage, and the cognitive dissonance of that was maddening. One couple sent me a wedding invitation, actually invited me to their wedding in Ohio, and I almost went, almost got on a plane to watch these two strangers commit to each other because of something I'd built, but at the last minute I couldn't do it, couldn't sit there and watch them promise forever when my own forever had lasted less than 15 years, so I sent a gift instead, some expensive kitchen appliance, and I wrote a card congratulating them and wishing them happiness, and then I sat in my empty house and cried for an hour, just sobbed into my hands like a child, because what was the point of any of this? What was the point of helping others find love when I was so fundamentally alone? Tommy and I finalized the divorce in December of '96. Almost 2 years after I quit my job to build the platform, 18 months after he moved out. We met at a lawyer's office, signed papers, divided assets. The house went to me because I needed it for the business. He took half the value in cash and retirement accounts, everything neat and fair and completely devastating. And when it was done we stood in the parking lot and he said, "I'm proud of what you built, I really am. I just wish you could have built it without destroying us." And I said, "Me too." And that was the last real conversation we ever had. We've seen each other a handful of times since then, always polite, always distant, like old acquaintances instead of people who once knew every detail of each other's lives. I signed those divorce papers and my hand was shaking, literally trembling as I wrote my name, and the lawyer asked if I was okay and I said yes, just emotional, and she nodded sympathetically like she'd seen this 1,000 times, and I wanted to tell her no, you don't understand, this isn't a normal divorce, this isn't two people who fell out of love, this is me destroying the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too obsessed with building something to appreciate what I already had, but I didn't say any of that. I just signed the papers and shook Tommy's hand like we were business associates closing a deal, and then I went home and drank half a bottle of wine and stared at the ceiling and wondered who I'd become. Here's what success actually looks like. By 1998 Matchlink had over 2 million users. We were profitable, expanding internationally, getting written up in major publications. I was doing interviews, speaking at conferences, being hailed as a pioneer in the tech industry. And I was lonely, so deeply profoundly lonely that some nights I would sit in my expensive apartment in San Francisco, because I'd moved by then, left our small town for the epicenter of the tech boom, and I would look at my awards and my bank statements and my empty bed and I would think, what have I done, what have I actually accomplished besides helping other people find what I threw away? The apartment in San Francisco was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the bay, modern furniture, expensive art on the walls, everything I'd ever wanted from a material perspective, and it felt like a museum, like a place where humans weren't supposed to actually live, just visit and admire. I would come home after 12-hour days at the office and the apartment would be dark and silent and I would turn on all the lights just to make it feel less empty, and then I would order takeout and eat it standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone felt too sad, too pathetic. This successful businesswoman eating pad thai straight from the container at 9 o'clock at night with no one to talk to about her day. I went on dates occasionally, met people through the platform ironically, and they would be nice, accomplished, compatible on paper, everything the algorithm said should work, but there was always this voice in my head comparing them to Tommy, measuring them against the standard of someone who'd loved me before I was successful, before I had anything to offer except myself, and nobody measured up. How could they? I was looking for something that doesn't exist, trying to recreate a connection I'd deliberately destroyed, and after a while I stopped trying. I just focused on the business, told myself I was too busy for relationships, that I'd deal with my personal life later, someday, when things calmed down. One date stands out in my memory. This was in '99. I met a guy named David who was a software engineer at another startup, smart and funny and kind, and we went to dinner at this trendy restaurant in the marina and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about technology and the future of the internet and our favorite books, and at the end of the night he walked me home and kissed me goodnight and asked if he could see me again, and I said yes, but when I got upstairs to my apartment, I felt nothing, absolutely nothing, no excitement, no anticipation, just this empty numbness, and I realized I was going through the motions, trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled with dates and dinners and nice men who weren't Tommy. I saw David 3 more times, we slept together once and it was fine, perfectly adequate, but lying there afterward I felt more alone than when I was actually alone, and he could tell something was off. He asked me if I was okay and I said yes, just tired, always tired, and he didn't push but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. And after that night he stopped calling and I didn't reach out and that was the end of that. Another failed attempt at connection, another reminder that I'd broken something inside myself when I chose the platform over my marriage. Things never calmed down. The platform kept growing, competing services emerged, we had to innovate constantly to stay ahead, there were acquisitions and partnerships and eventually in 2003 a major tech company bought Matchlink for an amount of money that would make your head spin. Enough money to never work again, to do whatever I wanted for the rest of my life, and everyone congratulated me, said I'd made it, said I was living the dream, and I smiled and thanked them and went home to my empty apartment. And cried for the first time in years, just sobbed like a child, because I'd achieved everything I'd set out to achieve and it felt like nothing, it felt empty, it felt like I'd won a game I no longer wanted to play. The day the acquisition went through, I sat in a conference room with lawyers and executives and they passed around papers to sign and everyone was smiling, shaking hands, talking about what an incredible journey it had been, and I signed my name over and over, initials here, signature there, and with each signature I felt like I was signing away the only thing that gave my life meaning, because what was I without Matchlink? Who was I if not the woman who built the dating platform? And when it was done and the money was wired to my account I went back to my office and just sat there staring at the wall, feeling this overwhelming sense of loss, mourning something I'd willingly sold, grieving for a part of myself I'd just let go. Sarah found me there hours later, she'd been celebrating with the team, and she came in and saw me sitting in the dark and she said, "What's wrong? We did it, we won," and I said, "Did we? What exactly did we win?" And she looked at me confused and said, "Financial security, recognition, the satisfaction of building something that mattered," and I said, "Yeah, I guess, but it didn't feel like winning, it felt like crossing a finish line only to realize there was nothing on the other side, no prize worth having, no reward that could make up for what I'd sacrificed to get there." I took 6 months off after the acquisition, tried to figure out who I was without the platform, without the constant work and pressure and demands on my time. I traveled, went to Italy and Thailand and New Zealand, places I'd always wanted to see but never had time for, and it was beautiful, breathtaking even, but I was experiencing it all alone, taking photos with no one to share them with, eating incredible meals at tables set for one, watching sunsets that deserved to be witnessed with someone you love, and the loneliness followed me everywhere, a constant companion, a shadow I couldn't escape. In Thailand I met this older couple, they must have been in their 70s, and they were on their 50th wedding anniversary trip, and I watched them at breakfast one morning, the way they moved around each other with such ease and familiarity, the way she would pour his coffee without asking how he took it, the way he would reach over and wipe a crumb from her cheek, these small intimate gestures that spoke of decades of partnership, and I felt this ache so deep I thought it might crack me open, because that's what I'd thrown away, that's what I'd sacrificed, the possibility of that kind of enduring connection, and for what? For money, for recognition, for the hollow satisfaction of having built something successful. I saw Tommy again in 2005. Pure coincidence, we were both at a mutual friend's wedding, hadn't seen each other in almost 10 years, and he looked older, softer around the edges, happy in a way I hadn't seen in our last years together, and he had someone with him, a woman named Rachel who was warm and funny and looked at him like he hung the moon, and I felt this sharp stab of jealousy mixed with relief because he'd found it again, he'd found love after me, which meant what we had wasn't irreplaceable, wasn't unique, he'd Just moved on and built something new with someone who was actually present, actually there, actually chose him every day. We talked for a few minutes, surface level stuff. How are you? What are you doing now? He'd started his own consulting firm, was doing well, living in Oregon, and then he said, I heard about the acquisition, congratulations, that's incredible, and I said, thank you, and he said, was it worth it? And I knew he wasn't being cruel, he was genuinely asking, and I thought about lying, about saying yes of course it was worth it, but instead I said, I don't know, ask me in another 10 years, and he nodded like he understood, like that was the answer he'd expected. And then Rachel came over and he introduced us and I shook her hand and smiled and congratulated them on their engagement, because apparently they were engaged, apparently he was getting married again, and I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection and thought, you're 44 years old, you're wealthy, you're successful, you've changed how millions of people find love, and you're utterly alone, and whose fault is that? I splashed water on my face and fixed my makeup and went back to the reception and watched Tommy dance with Rachel, watched the way he held her, the way he smiled at her, and I realized he'd never looked at me like that, not even in our early years, not even when we were happy, or maybe he had and I just hadn't been paying attention, hadn't been present enough to see it, and that thought was worse somehow, the idea that I'd had something precious and hadn't even noticed it until it was gone. Let me tell you something about regret. It's not dramatic, it doesn't hit you all at once, it's not like in the movies where there's one big moment of realization. Regret is slow and quiet, it accumulates like dust, a little more each day until one morning you wake up and realize you're buried in it, can't breathe through it, can't see past it. I started going to therapy in 2006, finally admitted I needed help processing everything, and my therapist asked me what I thought I'd lost by building Matchlink, and I said my marriage, obviously, and she said, what else? And I said, I don't know, and she said, think about it, what else did you lose? And I realized I'd lost the ability to be present, I'd lost the capacity to prioritize people over projects, I'd lost the version of myself who knew how to love someone without reservation, without always having one foot out the door, one eye on the next thing, the next goal, the next achievement. Therapy was hard, harder than building the platform, harder than anything I'd ever done, because it required me to look honestly at my choices, at the person I'd become, at the damage I'd caused, and there was no algorithm for that, no formula for fixing a broken soul. My therapist would ask me questions like, what would have happened if you'd waited, if you'd built the platform more slowly, if you'd tried to balance it with your marriage, and I would say, it wouldn't have worked, I wouldn't have been able to compete, the window would have closed, someone else would have done it first, and she would say, and would that have been so terrible? And I would sit there silent because the honest answer was yes. Yes, it would have been terrible. I needed to be the one. I needed to be first, and that need, that ambition, it was stronger than my love for Tommy, stronger than my commitment to our marriage, stronger than anything else in my life, and that realization, understanding that about myself, it made me feel like a monster. But my therapist helped me see that it wasn't quite that simple, that ambition isn't inherently bad, that wanting to create and build and achieve isn't a character flaw. The problem was I'd never learned how to integrate that ambition with the rest of my life. I'd treated it like an either-or proposition, either I build the platform or I have a marriage, when really the challenge was finding a way to do both, and I'd failed at that challenge, spectacularly, but failing didn't make me a monster. It just made me human, flawed and complicated and learning too late. I tried to rebuild myself after that. Spent years working on it, learning how to be alone without being lonely, how to find meaning beyond professional success, how to forgive myself for the choices I'd made. I volunteered at a women's shelter, taught coding classes to low-income students, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see but never had time for. I dated occasionally, more successfully than before, had a few relationships that lasted a year or two, but nothing stuck, nothing felt right, and I eventually made peace with the possibility that maybe I'd had my great love already, with Tommy, and I'd chosen to sacrifice it for something else, and that was my choice, my burden to carry, and I had to learn to live with it. The women's shelter work became really important to me, teaching these women who'd escaped abusive situations how to code, how to build websites, giving them skills that could lead to independence and financial stability, and it felt good, felt meaningful in a way the platform had stopped feeling, because I could see the direct impact, could watch these women transform from scared and uncertain to confident and capable, And one woman told me, "You gave me my life back, you gave me a future," and I thought, this is what I should have been doing all along, helping people in tangible immediate ways instead of building algorithms that connected strangers. But even that good work felt like penance, like I was trying to atone for my sins by helping others, and my therapist called me out on that. She said, "You're allowed to do good work just because it's good. Not everything has to be about making up for the past." And I said, "How do I know the difference? How do I know if I'm doing something because I genuinely care or because I'm trying to ease my guilt?" And she said, "Does it matter? If the outcome is the same, if you're helping people either way, does the motivation really matter?" And I thought about that for a long time, and I decided she was right. The why didn't matter as much as the what. I was making a difference. I was using my skills and resources to help people, and that counted for something, that had value. I had a relationship with a man named Michael from 2008 to 2010, and it was good, really good. He was patient and kind and understood my past, understood why I struggled with commitment and presence, and he didn't push. He just showed up consistently and let me move at my own pace, and for a while I thought maybe this could work, maybe I could build something real with him, but ultimately I self-sabotaged. I started picking fights, finding reasons to pull away, creating distance, and he called me on it. He said, "You're scared, you're terrified of getting close to someone again because you're afraid you'll hurt them the way you hurt Tommy." And I said, "You're right, I am terrified." And he said, "I'm not Tommy, I'm not going to let you disappear into your work, I'll fight for us." And I said, "I don't want you to have to fight, I don't want to be someone who requires fighting for." And we broke up the next week, amicably, sadly, and he said, "I hope you figure it out someday. I hope you learn that you deserve love, that you're allowed to be happy." And I nodded, but I didn't believe him, didn't believe I deserved happiness after what I'd done. But here's the thing about consequences, they're not always permanent. In 2015, 20 years after I launched Matchlink, I got an email from Tommy. Just a simple message saying he'd been thinking about me, wondering how I was doing, would I want to grab coffee if I was ever in Oregon. I stared at that email for 3 days before responding, going through every possible interpretation, every potential outcome, and finally I wrote back, said yes I would love to, and we met at this little cafe in Portland, both of us nervous like teenagers, and we talked for 4 hours, really talked, about everything that happened, everything we'd lost, everything we'd learned since. He told me his marriage to Rachel had ended after 8 years, amicable divorce, no kids, they'd just grown apart, wanted different things, and he said it with this self-awareness that made me realize he'd done his own work, his own therapy, his own reckoning with the past. I told him about my decades of success and loneliness, about how I'd built an empire of connection while being fundamentally disconnected myself, and he listened without judgment, without "I told you so," just listened the way he used to when we were young and everything was simple. He told me he'd been angry for a long time after we divorced, angry at me for choosing the platform, angry at himself for not fighting harder, angry at the whole situation, and he'd let that anger poison his marriage to Rachel. He'd been so afraid of being neglected again that he'd become clingy and demanding, and she'd eventually told him she felt suffocated, that she needed space, and when she said that he realized he'd overcorrected, he'd gone from being with someone who ignored him to being someone who couldn't handle any amount of independence in a partner, and that realization had sent him to therapy too, and he'd spent years working on himself, learning to be secure in himself, learning that his worth wasn't determined by how much attention his partner gave him. I apologized to him that day, really apologized, not the surface level "I'm sorry" I said when he moved out, but a deep genuine apology where I acknowledged the specific ways I'd hurt him, the specific choices I'd made that damaged him, and I didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify my behavior, I just said I was sorry, I was wrong, I hurt you and I'm sorry. And he cried, just tears streaming down his face, and he said, "Thank you, I needed to hear that, I've needed to hear that for 20 years. And I cried too, both of us sitting in this cafe crying like idiots, and the barista kept glancing over looking concerned, but we didn't care, we just let ourselves feel it, let ourselves grieve together for what we'd lost. We started talking regularly after that. Phone calls, texts, visits every few months, rebuilding not our marriage but something new, a friendship built on the wreckage of what we'd been, and it was strange and beautiful and completely unexpected, and I didn't let myself hope for more, didn't let myself imagine that maybe we could find our way back to each other because that felt greedy, felt like asking for too much after everything I'd destroyed. But the friendship was real and deep and meaningful. We would talk about everything, our work, our families, his mother's death which he told me about and I cried because I'd loved her and I'd let her down, our fears, our regrets, our hopes for whatever time we had left, and it felt like coming home, like finding a piece of myself I thought was gone forever, and I cherished it, protected it, made sure I was present for him in a way I'd never been during our marriage, and he noticed, he said. "You're different now, you're here, really here," and I said, "I learned the hard way what matters, I learned what I should have known all along." One time I flew to Oregon just to help him move into a new house, spent 3 days carrying boxes and unpacking and hanging pictures, and it was mundane and exhausting and perfect, and at night we'd order pizza and sit on the floor of his empty living room and talk until midnight, and I felt this contentment I hadn't felt in decades, this sense of peace, and I didn't analyze it, didn't question it. I just let myself enjoy being with someone who knew me, really knew me, the good and the bad and the ugly, and chose to spend time with me anyway. But then last year, 2024, 29 years after I built the platform, Tommy told me he still loved me. We were hiking this trail near his house, autumn leaves everywhere, that specific kind of beautiful that makes you ache, and we stopped at this overlook and he said, "I need to tell you something, I never stopped loving you, I tried. God knows I tried, but you're still the person I measure everyone else against, and I know that's probably not fair to either of us but it's the truth and I needed you to know." My first reaction was panic, pure animal panic, because this was everything I wanted and everything I was terrified of, and I said, "Tommy, we tried this already, we failed, I destroyed us," and he said, "We were different people then, we're not those people anymore," and I said, "How do you know I won't do it again? How do you know I won't get obsessed with some new project and disappear on you?" And he said, "I don't know, I don't have guarantees, but I know you've done the work, I've watched you change over these past 9 years, I've seen you show up for me consistently, and I trust that version of you, I trust who you've become." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him the same thing, that I'd carried him with me all these years, that every relationship I'd tried had failed because nobody was him. But another part of me was terrified of hurting him again, terrified that I was still the same person who would choose work over love, projects over presence, terrified that I hadn't actually changed enough to deserve a second chance. We stood there in silence for a long time, looking out over the valley, the mountains in the distance, the trees ablaze with color, and I thought about all the years I'd spent alone, all the success that felt hollow, all the money and recognition that couldn't fill the void, and I thought about Tommy, about his patience and his forgiveness and his willingness to risk his heart again with someone who'd shattered it before, and I realized that if he was brave enough to try, I had to be brave enough too. I had to trust that I'd changed, that I could be different, that I could choose him this time, really choose him, every single day. But here's what I've learned after 3 decades of helping other people find love: sometimes the algorithm doesn't matter, sometimes compatibility scores and data points and carefully calculated matches are meaningless, sometimes love is just about showing up, about choosing the person standing in front of you, about being present even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, and I looked at Tommy standing there, this man who'd known me at 16 and at 40 and at 60, who'd seen me at my worst and was somehow still here, still willing to try, and I said, "I love you too. I never stopped, and I'm terrified but I want to try again. I want to see if we can build something new from what we broke." He kissed me then, and it felt like coming home and like something brand new all at once, familiar but different, comfortable but exciting, and when we pulled apart he was smiling and crying and he said, "We're going to do it differently this time, we're going to set boundaries and communicate and choose each other every day," and I said, yes we are, and I meant it with every cell in my body. Because I'd learned the hard way what happens when you don't, I'd lived the consequences of putting work before love, and I wasn't going to make that mistake again, I couldn't survive making that mistake again. We've been together for a year now. Not married yet, taking it slow, relearning each other, figuring out who we are now versus who we were then, and it's not perfect, nothing ever is, but it's real, it's present, I'm present in a way I wasn't before, and yes I still work, I consult for startups and nonprofits, I'm still passionate about technology and innovation, but I've learned to set boundaries, to close my laptop at 6, to put my phone away during dinner, to choose this relationship consciously, actively, every single day. And Tommy understands me now in a way he couldn't back then, understands the drive, the need to create, the way ideas can consume you, because he's older too, he's had his own ambitions and projects, he gets it, and we've learned to make space for both, to support each other's work without losing each other in it, to be partners who can exist independently but choose to exist together. We have rituals now, new ones. We cook dinner together every night and we talk about our days, really talk, asking questions and listening to answers, and we go for walks in the evening, holding hands like teenagers, and we have a no phones rule after 8 p.m., just us and whatever we want to do together, watch a movie, play cards, read books on the couch, just being together without distractions. And it sounds simple but it's everything, it's the life I should have built 30 years ago, it's the partnership I threw away because I didn't understand its value. Last month we bought a house together, nothing fancy, just a small place in the suburbs with a yard and a porch, and we've been fixing it up together, painting walls, planting flowers, choosing furniture, and every decision we make together feels significant, feels like we're building something real and lasting. And Tommy said the other day, "This is what I wanted all along, just this, just us building a life together," and I said, "Me too. I just didn't know it back then, I was too busy looking ahead to see what was right in front of me." So what's the moral here, what's the lesson, what am I trying to tell you after all these words about my messy complicated life? I think it's this. You can build something incredible and lose something irreplaceable in the process. Both things can be true simultaneously. Matchlink helped millions of people find love, changed the landscape of dating, pioneered an industry that didn't exist before, and that matters, that's real, I'm proud of it. But it also cost me my marriage, cost me years of loneliness and regret, cost me a version of myself I'll never get back. And I can't tell you if it was worth it because that's not a question with a clear answer, it depends on the day, the mood, the moment you ask me. What I can tell you is this. If you're going to build something, if you're going to chase that impossible dream, do it with your eyes open. Understand the price, understand what you're sacrificing, make it a conscious choice instead of something that just happens while you're not paying attention. And if you can, if you're lucky, try to bring the people you love along with you, try to make space for them inside your obsession, try to remember that success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. And if you fail at that, if you lose people along the way, if you make the mistakes I made, know that it's not necessarily permanent. Know that people are more resilient and forgiving than you think, know that sometimes you get second chances, sometimes the algorithm brings you back to the person you lost, sometimes there's redemption in the wreckage, but you have to be willing to show up differently, to be different, to actually change instead of just promising to change. I'm 60 years old now. I've had a career that most people would kill for, made money, made an impact, left a legacy. But the thing I'm most proud of, the thing that feels most significant, is that I'm sitting here with Tommy in the house we just bought together, starting over, building something new, and this time I'm choosing him, actively, consciously, every single day, and that choice feels more revolutionary than anything I ever coded, more important than any platform I ever built. Because here's the secret nobody tells you about love and success, they're not opposites, they're not competing forces, but they do require different things from you. And learning to balance them, learning to succeed without sacrificing connection, that's the real challenge, that's the real innovation, and most of us, myself included, have to fail at it completely before we figure out how to do it right. The tech industry loves to glorify the hustle, loves to celebrate founders who work 100 hours a week, who sacrifice everything for their vision, who burn out relationships and health in pursuit of success, and we treat that as heroic, as admirable, as the price you have to pay to change the world. But nobody talks about what comes after. Nobody talks about the founders who achieve everything and then look around at their empty lives and wonder what it was all for. Nobody talks about the divorce rates and the loneliness and the regret that comes from winning at business while losing at life. And I'm guilty of perpetuating that narrative. I gave interviews where I talked about working 18-hour days like it was something to be proud of. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. I made other founders feel like they weren't committed enough if they wanted to have a life outside their startup, and I regret that. I regret contributing to a culture that treats human relationships as disposable, as less important than the next funding round or product launch, because that's not true. It's the opposite of true. Relationships are what matter, connection is what matters, love is what matters, Everything else is just noise. So if you're watching this from your own kitchen table at 3 in the morning, working on your impossible dream, I see you, I honor you, I understand the fire driving you forward. Just don't forget to look up occasionally, don't forget the people around you, don't forget that the whole point of building something is to make the world better for humans, and humans need connection, need presence, need love, need someone to see them and choose them and show up for them, and that includes you, that especially includes you. Build your platform, chase your dream, change the world if you can. But remember that success is hollow without someone to share it with, and the person you're neglecting now might not be there when you finally have time to pay attention, and that loss, that specific loss, will haunt you in ways that no amount of money or recognition can heal. I got lucky. I got a second chance I probably didn't deserve. Tommy came back, we rebuilt, we're figuring it out together. But not everyone gets that, and I don't want you to have to lose everything to learn what I learned. I don't want you to spend decades achieving and regretting in equal measure. I don't want you to become the architect of other people's happiness while destroying your own. So learn from my mistakes, do it better than I did, find a way to hold both, to create and connect, to innovate and intimate, to build something extraordinary while keeping the people you love close enough to enjoy it with you. That's the real challenge, that's the real revolution, and if you can do it, if you can succeed at both, then you'll have achieved something I spent 30 years trying to figure out, something more valuable than any platform or patent or pile of money. You'll have built a life that actually feels full, that actually feels like winning, that actually feels like enough. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, easy for you to say, you already built your thing, you already got rich, you already changed the world, now you get to lecture everyone else about balance. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm not lecturing, I'm confessing, I'm telling you the truth about what it cost me, about what I lost, about the years I can never get back, about the damage that can never be fully repaired, and I'm hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone out there will hear this and make different choices, will figure out how to integrate their ambition with their relationships, will build something amazing without destroying themselves in the process. Because the world needs what you're building, it does. The world needs innovation and creativity and people brave enough to chase impossible ideas, but the world also needs you to be okay, needs you to be whole, needs you to maintain your humanity while you're changing the future, and if you lose yourself in the process, if you sacrifice everything that makes you human in pursuit of success, then what's the point? Then what have you really accomplished? Tommy and I are planning to get married again, nothing big, just us and a few close friends, maybe on the beach at sunset, somewhere simple and beautiful. And this time when I make those vows I'll understand what they mean, I'll understand the weight of promising forever to someone, the commitment required to actually show up day after day, year after year, decade after decade, and I'll mean it in a way I didn't mean it the first time, when I was 22 and thought love was just a feeling, instead of a choice you make over and over again. He asked me last week if I had any regrets about how things turned out, about the path we took to get here, and I thought about it for a long time before answering. And finally I said, I regret the pain I caused you, I regret the years we lost, I regret not being brave enough to choose you the first time, but I don't regret building Matchlink, I don't regret chasing my dream, I just regret thinking I had to choose one or the other. I regret not knowing that it was possible to have both, and he nodded and said, maybe we needed to lose each other to appreciate what we had, maybe we needed to grow separately before we could grow together, and maybe he's right. Maybe this is exactly how it was supposed to happen, but I still wish I'd known then what I know now. I still wish I could have saved us both years of loneliness and pain. But that's the thing about wisdom, you can't skip to it, you can't learn it from books or advice or other people's stories, you have to live through the mistakes, you have to feel the consequences, you have to carry the regret before you can transform it into something useful, and so all I can do is tell you my story and hope that somewhere in the mess of it you find something valuable. Some insight that helps you navigate your own impossible choices. Thank you for staying with me through this whole messy story, through all the mistakes and regrets and occasional redemptions. I know it wasn't the fairy tale you might have expected, wasn't all triumph and glory, but it was real, it was honest, it was my truth, and I hope somewhere in there you found something useful, something that helps you navigate your own impossible choices. The truth is, I'm still figuring it out, I'm still learning how to balance ambition and love, work and presence, building and being, and some days I do it well and some days I fail, but the difference now is I notice, I pay attention, I course correct before the damage gets too deep, and that's all any of us can do, notice and adjust and choose again, every single day choosing what matters most. If you're still here, if you made it through all these words of my rambling confession, leave me a comment telling me where you are and what time it is right now. I want to know who's out there listening, who's sitting in their own kitchen at 3 in the morning wondering if they should take the leap, who's already mid-jump wondering if they'll land safely. Tell me your story, tell me your struggles, tell me if any of this resonated with you or if I'm just an old woman talking to herself about ancient history. And if you found something valuable here, if this helped you think differently about success and sacrifice and second chances, do me a favor and hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel because I've got more stories to tell, more mistakes to confess, more lessons learned the hard way, and maybe together we can figure out how to do this impossible thing called living a little bit better than we did yesterday. Next video I'm going to talk about something completely different but equally messy. Stay tuned for that. I promise it'll be worth your time, and until then, take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and remember that whatever you're building, it's only worth it if you can still recognize yourself when you're done building it. Thanks for listening.